I think it's time to start, right? This is the 5th panel, the role of transport. This is the session we expect to have, let's say, more data. We expect to have more information about the agencies and the role of certain business cases, so as to combine, let's say, the previous presentations with this sort of perspectives. It doesn't need much to say about the role of transport, how critical it is in the whole mass phenomenon. Actually, it is setting major issues in the center of our debate. Personally, I'm looking to be benefited by this sort of presentations, expecting to listen information and, you know, whole new narratives about quite neglected areas, I would say, until so far, even for the whole tourism phenomenon. And allow me here to insist on the importance of tourism as a phenomenon and not as a sector, as a multiple phenomenon. And of course, in the importance of transportation as this critical link, not only in bibliography, but also, I would say, even at the business until today. Having said this, I think we'll start with Irini Karamouzi, the advertising campaign of Olympic Airways, 1957-1990. I assume that your presentation will not reach as far as 1990, but I expect. Okay. So let's start with you, Irini. No need for further introduction.
Hello.
You know her.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Should I start? Okay, great. Thank you so much. This is a project that started almost 2 years ago as an idea, and it was completely new for me because I had never looked at aviation or tourism at the time. Therefore, it has taken me a long time to be able to grasp the idea behind it. And also, I was trying to see how I can, by doing this kind of extensive literature review of looking from different disciplines, sociology, political science, anthropology, ethnographic studies, to try to see how my kind of historical approach could really complement and enrich what I already was reading. And some people are already here, like Angelos and Michalis, who have written on the topic of tourism, and many, many others. And I was trying to understand how I can expand on this. So first of all, why Olympic Airways? Very quickly, you must know most of it. It's the central protagonist of the presentation of the project was Greece's national flagship. And its story, actually, it's inextricably linked to the country's own tumultuous history. The glory days of aviation in Greece began on April 1957, when the operational rights of the Greek air industry were transferred to the shipping magnate Aristotelis Onassis, for which Zelina Harlaftis is going to publish a huge edited volume on many of his businesses. One of them is the Olympic Airways, and Alexandra Papadopoulou will talk much more in detail about how it operated. So please save the questions on why and how this airline worked to Alexandra. I'm doing a completely different aspect of it today. But as I said, it was very linked to its history. It was owned, therefore, by a shipping magnate, but it was operated the country's air flag carrier under a contract with the state. The company initially operated only domestic flights, but very quickly at its peak, it reached a 5-continent network. Olympic Airways was kind of stereotypically renowned for offering stylish, sleek, luxurious service. Its crew was wearing Chanel and Gardin clothing, and the cutlery was very famously gold-plated. Its iconic terminal was designed by Saarinen. In linear time, of course, as we move into metapolitefsi, the airline made less salubrious headlines. It was sold by Onassis back to the state in 1975, and it soon became a vehicle for extensive clientelism, corruption, and political favoritism, and it has been very well documented by Papadimitriou and Featherstone on what exactly went wrong. Therefore, it was finally closed down in 2009 as the Greek debt crisis erupted. You see here, it's an understanding of how it became a 5-continent airline. And for us, it's very important to remember when we're looking at the advertising campaign that we have we have an airline from a small country that actually, however, has international 5-continent audience. So that's very important to remember when we're trying to evaluate why should we be looking at this airline's advertising campaign. It's because of its reach. And you see that in this map here. Some photos, but we can move on. So why post-war aviation? So aviation, as you know, Angelo said, for the last 60 to 70 years, the airline industry has actually been characterized by continued high growth. Annual growth in global passengers was much faster in the 50s and the 60s when aviation was a new industry, but over time, growth rates declined as the industry became more mature, but still the growth rates are impressive. In the 1970s, the annual growth were close to 10%. The steady long-term, though fluctuating growth in the demand for air travel had been generated by many drivers, several of which actually reinforced each other. You went from 1950 to 1984, reaching from 31 million passengers to a staggering 832 million. Therefore, as with everything that we've been talking today about tourist development and post-war aviation, it has to do, of course, with the rapid technological development that happened post-45, especially in air travel and engine technology, which actually resulted in larger, faster, and more economically efficient aircraft. Also, at the same time, in Western Europe and North America, we have rising housing income. In the 60s and the 70s, there is a growing proportion of the population that actually can travel and making use of airlines and reach new destinations by flying. Traditionally also, and that's what important for our story and our period, is that the airline industry during the period under examination is a highly regulated, one of the most regulated of industries. It's only in the late 1970s that in the States, at least, this international regulatory framework is put into questions. Before, what you had was this hundreds of bilateral air services between pairs of states and was supported inter-airline pooling agreements, and they were setting prices and tariffs at a very specific rate. There was no actual flexibility, and that's important to remember because that means it takes away from one major point of advertising, that this was not about the price, because until the 1970s, at least, there was no competition here. You had to reinvent yourself on how you're going to distinguish your airline from other airlines. So knowing this kind of background of regulation, I think it's very important. In Europe, it's so much later. It goes into the 90s, and only in 2007, we have the Open Skies Agreement between the EU and the United States. So that's also an important part about thinking about aviation. So why airlines as a topic of historical research? I have to say, I read this fantastic book by Van Vleck, who has actually written about Pan America. And she tells the story as the rise of American empire. And she looks at it not just as a modernization quest. And she said that the airplanes were not just at the forefront of technology. In post-war America, the visual cues of its planes were not only imbued with the idea of scientific advancement, but also resonated with the current nationalist ideology, symbolizing America's victory and superiority over past and present enemies. And the book is amazing, needless to say. And she makes this idea and a strong point about how by looking at Pan America, you can really tell the story of post-war American, and not only foreign policy, but also soft power. Also, since its inception, the airplane has been an object that sparks excitement and wonder. I don't know if that's the case today, but that was definitely the case in the post-war period. It can represent independence and freedom, opening up to a whole new world of possibility to the curious traveler. It can similarly serve as the pinnacle of luxurious living, not anymore with the charter flights, but definitely in the period under investigation. And as Bennett says, airlines are hugely symbolic. They remind us of the still enormous power of nationalism, for unlike trains or cars, aircraft bear flags and brand themselves with national signs. So there's a differentiation there between different modes of transport. But also what was interesting for me is that we were trying to discuss yesterday and today, how we need to think about also non-state actors in articulating national identity. So what you have here with Olympic Airways is a private company that however works as the national air flag carrier, and they are contributing, they're acting as a conduit for official and unofficial articulations of the country's national identity. So what I will try to do in this presentation, but mostly as I proceed with my research, is to really try to understand how Olympic Airways was cooperating or competing or conflicting with the state government and other many actors that you will see through advertising. So therefore, this is an example of how we can look in business to tell us a story about national identity and not just at the NGDO, which is a great issue, but I'm just trying to complement that. And of course, what is the role of aviation and tourism? Flying is a significant part of the tourist product. It's for many people the start and the end of the tourist experience. So we have to think about how, of course, looking at airlines, looking at aviation, it reflects and bodes well with global trends in tourism, in consumption, and societal changes. But also tourism representation reveals much as about the representers as they do of the represented. So the imagery in advertising to sell tourism and aviation is not innocent or unbiased. It can be viewed in terms of the wider cultural values and political statements it makes. So tourism in Greece, I'll go very quickly. You know the story. We were an amazing case study in the post-war period, as was all of the other Southern European, Mediterranean European countries. The numbers are staggering, and I won't go into any of the, we've known very well how they were organized. The National Tourist Board was integrated to the Office of the Prime Minister. It lost its propaganda character. It gained much more creativity. We'll see exactly how that worked on. I won't go into the details. One, of course, what we know very well is that Greece, at least from what I've seen from our archival research, the main point of the reference was, of course, how Spain was doing so well and how Greece could emulate the Spanish example. From what I've seen, this seems to be a constant preoccupation. What have they been doing that we could emulate in a way that keeps the Greek idiosyncrasies, but at the same time reaches that same level? I don't know the answer of that, but I can see the questioning within the archives. And this is the numbers alone. You've seen it in other charts as well, so I'll move on quickly on that. So the idea of airlines, therefore, in marketing, and this is where my focus really is, and it really gets. And I was very much inspired in a way by, works like the Crete and the Irresistible Empire, where it says that advertisers themselves would have been the first to acknowledge that it's difficult, if not impossible, to determine exactly the impact of their message to the public. This is not actually what I'm doing here, and I don't think it can be done. So instead of measuring the impact, I'm trying to understand the campaign and tactics behind the campaign and the campaign itself. Therefore, I am subscribing to her agenda that it's almost nearly impossible to be able to measure that looking historically back. But what I think is very interesting is that because advertising reflects trends and movements within the society, you can really focus on this language and the imagery, which mirrors broader social values and cultural stereotypes. It shows us how we see ourselves and how business see themselves. If we trace for the history of the industry's advertisement, we also trace the changing self-perception of the industry, of the country, and of the global societal trends. And this was much more the case in the case of the airline and here in the Olympic Airways, because it had a global audience, as I said, but also, therefore, it had to accommodate different nationalities and also represent the country itself. So it was a hard fit to be able to do. And of course, as we've said here before, airlines was a huge discussion in the literature of the quest for modernization. And what I found, and I will agree, of course, with the pivotal work by Engerman and Unger on issue of tourism and modernization, where they say that global histories of modernization must be written from the local, must be written from specific projects and individuals. Therefore, we need to see the value of our work, how much Olympic Airways, for example, or other issues can be seen as telling a story that actually has global ramification and not just national or local, without not downplaying the importance of either. It is counterintuitive to suggest that the best way to understand the global process is by narrowing the focus. Local studies offer an excellent avenue to the study of global studies of modernization without losing sight of regional, national, and international circumstances. So what am I doing here? Some data to kind of rile you up, because I saw with Odysseus that it had a bit of a reaction here. So what I've done at Sheffield, we cooperated with the Digital Humanities Institute, and we thought, how can we really offer qualitative and quantitative analysis of the advertising? So we went through all of the foreign press. I'm going to explain what it is. And we wanted to do four things in the project overall. One will be corpus linguistic on the ads. The ads at the time, don't forget, they had an image, but they had a very long text, which means that there is a lot to decipher from that text. It's not just a logo or a slogan. This was a text that was very much targeted to its imagined or potential travelers. So the one has to do with corpus linguistic, which I will explain. The other one is the iconographic analysis, which we've seen at all, which is much more qualitative. At some point with Mary Koniadou, we want to do quantitative image analysis, but we'll see how that will work. But also not just iconographic analysis of the advertisement itself. We want to do what Mary has been working on, which is called the politics of the page. Where exactly is the advertisement placed? What else is next to the advertisement? As you will see, the Green campaign was quite coordinated. When you have an advertisement from the GNTO, there's an advertisement on Olympic Airways and one from Travelline, an agency. Clearly, they were working together. Clearly, they were co-financing this campaign. So even if you don't know the background story, the page itself can tell you the story. And I think this is quite interesting for us to delve into these kind of different ideas. And the other one, which we haven't done, and that's hopefully what we'll get with the Witness Seminar series, is the interviews with different stakeholders. You were asking before in the previous panel, who decides what? What about the graphic designers? What about the artists? This is immensely important questions. We cannot find them in archives. As Angelos said, there's an abysmal state of the Greek tourist archives. Our best solution probably will be that. And the more concentrated we do it, the better results we get. So that's something that is seen to be done, and I'm hopeful that we get much more results. And of course, archival sources. Already you have seen glimpses of what we can have. There are many periodicals here. Elias will talk about their own afterwards. These are sources here and there that we're trying to amass and get as much information as possible. Therefore, this is a complex puzzle to be able to get a story, and we're still missing a lot of parts. So why advertising in Greece? This is an example, you saw it before. This is from, can someone tell me who has designed this? Yes. This did not have the Olympic logo on it. And when the creator saw it, he was shocked. He had not signed off to have Olympic on it, but Olympic didn't care. They said they are co-paying so they can put the logo in. He said in an interview, I was shocked. I never wanted to see that. They thought that they could see the connection between the poster for Greece and Olympic either ways. That was completely wrong. I asked them to take it out in the next round of prints. Of course, they never did. End of quote. This is from an amazing PhD, by the way, by Emanuel Marina, graphic design and modernization in Greece. He has done an amazing job. It's an unpublished PhD, unfortunately. But it gives you a sense of how these artists did not have as much agency of what is happening. But at the same time, you know, if we take the American kind of literature, they are seen as apostles of modernity. They feel they have a duty to be able to express what is the Greek version of the quest for modernization. So a little bit about my methodology, bear with me. The idea, therefore, was to combine qualitative close reading of the advertisement. Just to let you know, there were almost 500 advertisements of Olympic Airways. That is a huge amount if you think about it, just in the international press. And it's completely unbeknown to most people. We don't see them. Some of them circulate, some of them don't. So the idea was, therefore, to use our qualitative with our quantitative corpus linguistic to, in a way, you know, combine the meanings in text from semantic to pragmatic to discursive meaning. At the simplest level, corpus technology helps find other examples of a phenomena one has already noted. At the other extreme, it reveals patterns of use previously unthought of. between it can reinforce, refute, or revise a research intuition and show them why and how much of their suspicions were grounded. So we analyze the entire corpus and we compare subcorpora from each decade against the other decades. We did this was arbitrary, but we wanted to try to track the changes from decade to decade. Of course, this is not the best approach, but it was something because there are different events. You have the Greek dictatorship in 67 to 74, but this was a way to try to get some quantitative results. So the sample was all Olympic Airways advertisements in domestic and international newspapers from 57 to 2009, as Angelos very well noted, and it's true, there was no advertisement in the 1990s. The campaign had run dry, they were very limited, they were not statistically significant to even try to put it in the corpus. The domestic was, we searched that through a word search with newspapers that have been digitalized, which is the Dole Archive and Kathimerini. So not all of the newspapers that are digitalized. And then internationally, again, through our universities, we're able to get access to usually what we tried to do was to target the main tourist groups that were coming into Greece. That is the UK, Germany, the United States, and at some point Denmark, but we couldn't find access to that. So what you have here is the UK, the United States, Canada, and Australia, and France through Le Monde. So that's the sample we've been going through. So as I said, there are 901, almost 100 tokens. Tokens in the data is one of the words. There are 6,000 types in the data. That was considered statistically significant to be able to draw conclusions. Domestic newspapers was a complete disappointment. Initially, I wanted to compare domestic with international to see what is the difference. When they are talking to the Greek audience, are they changing the message? No, there was no message there. What we ended up having was just a series of informative advertisements. There was no creativity. There was no real image. It was very much static. The text was limited. The difference between the Greek and the international was horribly different. There are some explanations that we want to think about. One of them is that it took a while to be interested in internal tourism, but also I think the use of the car was much more important in internal tourism than actually using the plane. But then again, I have not really contextualized it. I cannot prove the causality, but definitely it did not help in comparing domestic with international. And this is just one of the good examples that I found here, where you can see it's mainly focused not in internal tourism, but kind of encouraging Greeks to go abroad through using Olympic Airways. And this again in the 1990s, one of the few. So let's start with the international whole corpus at the time. What is the coherence? To explain, through corpus linguistics, you search, for example, right next to Greece, what words are coming next to Greece or two words following Greece. So what we came up that is the immediate adjacent coherence for Greece are ancient, not surprised, classical, and modern. This comes through in the whole corpus, but this cluster actually is very strongly represented in the decade of the 1950s and 60s, not in the 70s and the 80s. Classical, modern, and ancient are also the most common co-occurring content words within 2 words of Greece. Within 3 words of Greece, you have national and airline, which is not surprising. That gives you an idea, and I'll go much details. But let's start decade by decade. So 1960s, the top 25 keywords for the 60s are destinations, not in Greece, abroad. Tel Aviv, Paris, Cairo. The keenest scores is from 40 to over 200. This seems that the focus of the Olympic Airways in the 60s was a global lifestyle. There is a de-emphasis of Greece. And you don't see that if you take it one by one. But statistically, it seems that the most important thing for Olympic Airways was where you would fly to, not actually coming to Greece. So the 1960s Olympic Airways emphasizing that it offers access to a global lifestyle and a long list of destinations. And this is very striking and very different from what you get in the subsequent decades. And you see that here as an example, Tel Aviv, Beirut, Nicosia, and then the very famous at the time Comet airplanes. But this was not just the story. what you also get is that what I saw qualitatively much more was that the rise of tourism and travel did not necessarily yield any new transnational identities, but actually it reinforced distinctly national identities. So what you have here is that besides modern and ancient, what seems to be identifying as the main Greek characteristic is warmth. That becomes the slogan for most of the decade for Olympic Airways, which of course denotes the climate, but also the state of the Greek people and how they socialize. But also you see here it's represented in the advertisements of the GNTO. It's not just the sun, sea, and sand, but also they are also talking about Greece greets you warmly. So warmly and warmth become the go-to word about Greece that we barely see in the posters or in other kind of research. So it's something that we may need to think about more. And the third thing that came up, of course, is dancing. This was a very persistent theme. It ran for a whole decade. I was shocked. People were dancing through all of the Olympic Airways advertisement for a whole decade, from a democratic regime to a dictatorial regime back to a recently democratized regime. So changes politically made no difference in how Greeks were denoting and presenting themselves. So this is a very interesting kind of campaign, and I want you to show it because this was run by a foreign company. So the most important thing you need to remember that I came up with the campaign, if we're talking about actors, these were not Greek actors, the Greek agents, Greek stakeholders, constructing the Greek identity. No, it were foreigners. The Greek state and the business of Olympic Airways were giving money. They were assigning all of the campaign, most of the campaigns, to international agencies that we barely talk of or know. And this is a very kind of heavy research load that we need to uncover who these people were, why were they getting these campaigns, and how they were coming up with these ideas. So what you get here is that Lambert Agency did most of the advertising for the whole decade of the 60s and the 70s for Olympic Airways. And what is interesting, they did it also for Traveline, which is the largest designer of travel tours in Greece in that period, and the GNTO. So they had three different kinds of companies taking care of Greece's campaign at the time. And the idea was, and I went through an interview that I found in New York Times after a long time by William, I think it's Wurzel, his name, who was the creative director. He said, I was very cleverly playing each of the three campaigns to give effect to one another. For example, in magazines, a full page, four-color GNTO ad is always faced by 1/3 page black and white ads for the other two clients. And in broadcasts for different clients, go in alternate waves, so there is a fairly consistent reminder of Greek tourism. And you see the example here. Traveline, Olympic Airways, GNTO. One page, all cover in the New York Times. You see this interconnection of different groups trying to project different identity. But also what you get here is what is interesting, and I didn't know, this please no dancing in the aisles, which I'm going to show it to you, and I'm sure that the Greeks in the room won't find it at all interesting, is that it won the Gold Lion Awards at the Cannes International Film Festival in 1967. And I'm going to show you which one it is. Hope this works.
Every night, Olympic Airways super fan jets head for Europe and the Middle East. On board, there's plenty to do. We planned it that way. After all, Olympic is the airline of Greece. There's 21 club food, one of the great wine cellars in the air, lively passengers, first-run movies, and 7 stereo channels, including one with vibrant Greek music. You're headed in our direction. Call your travel agent or Olympic Airways. If they're partying all the way to Paris, Rome, Athens, Cairo, or Tel Aviv. First, we ask you please don't answer in the aisles.
So this was the advertisement that won the award. And this very much kind of goes back to the great papers we talked about, the stereotyping that we see in films. It's completely picked up. It's like you're seeing Zorbaz in a way on the airline advertising. And it's something that persists. If you go through the all advertising, this seems to be, according to the creators as well, the winning formula in getting especially American tourists into the country. And also you have cooperations, not just with advertising campaigns, but Olympic Airways, of course, had cooperation with the British European Airways, and they had to co-finance a campaign as well. So what you see here is that there are other stakeholders that have a say that have nothing to do with the country itself. So then in the 1970s, what you have there for the change when you do the corpus linguistics is that there is finally now no other destination that has high keenness. What happens is that there is a major shift from emphasizing a long list of European and Middle Eastern destinations and to emphasizing Greece. Then in the 70s, that's what becomes the focal point of the campaign. And of course, at the same time, and not actually paradoxically, you also have the semantic field of bargain, steal, value. Because of the crisis, the energy crisis of the 70s, it's not a coincidence that Greece is able to discuss that much more. But also, if you want to contextualize it, of course, we have the beginning of the inclusive tours that also the airways are allowed to incorporate in their packages. As I said, what you also start having, by the way, which was never the case in the 50s and the 60s, is that there are very few mention of escapism. And one of the phrases that comes up quite often is a phrase that much of modern Crete is unmolested by the modern man. And it really kind of goes back to the anthropologist, sociologist, Susan Bock-Mars, who have studied Greek tourism, and she talked about ethnographically much more how this kind of escapist journey has been imposed by the tourist industry. And this is kind of a reflection of that, but it's much less than the dancing or the other things we've talked about. And what is interesting, the third kind of theme that comes up, of course, and I found quite easily, is that the way they phrase the message has to do with the technological advancement. Within 3 words of Athens or Greece, you have sleep down to Athens on the quiet. These examples are all from 1979, which is foreshadowing the emphasis on the quietness of the planes, which is advertised much more in the 1980s as we go ahead. And for the first time, actually, we also see the Athens, the city, come at the forefront of the advertising campaign. That was before the case. You see, now you can sleep down to Athens on the quiet, which has to do with much more with the experience on the plane before you make it to the country. And then some other examples. I'm going to move forward quickly. And then in the 80s, what you have, paradoxically, they ditch Greece, they ditch all about quietness. This is all about luxury. That's what becomes the major theme for Greece in the 1980s, which I think is interesting. We think about it, the social trends and developments are happening also in Greece in the 1980s, but also the rise of neoliberalism that kind of, underscores these kind of ideas, and you see them reflected in these advertisements. Look at this. I mean, if you think the Botticelli was bad, these Airbus seats are so roomy. And this was one of the major campaigns here. And also a lot of civilized experience while being luxurious. That is a kind of a combination here. You see a sea of tranquility from the people who invented civilization, a more civilized way to fly, but also this kind of luxurious. You see you're inside enjoying a luxurious life while being on the plane. And you see that again here. But by the way, this is not just Olympic Airways. I looked in other airlines from Southern Europe. They had the same preoccupation about luxury and space and play. So you see that Olympic, in a way, is following the trends in other Southern European airlines. Same with Iberia here. So as you see, therefore, as bargains are replaced by luxury, there's no more dancing anymore. There's no more warmth. This is all about the luxurious escape that starts from the flight. So your holding Greece starts the moment you enter the airplane. For them, that's where the Greek experience began, which is interesting. And what I want to kind of finish off before, I think what is interesting for the advertising to understand and see the intricacies of these different stakeholders is the impact of international developments, which you see on the advertising. Here, in 1974, it says a timely reminder from Olympic Airways, you can still fly to Greece. This is after the fall of the dictatorship. When we entered the European Economic Community, we were celebrating this. Again, this was a major feature in the summer of 1979 and 1981. And this is the best one. So what happened here? In 1985, Greece was looking forward to a record-breaking year of influx of 500,000 Americans when there was the hijack of the TWA jet from Greece, leaving the Athens International Airport. The then President Reagan, they had an announcement. They were advising American tourists not to fly to Greece, and the numbers dropped from 20%, and the year afterwards dropped to 50%. Simos Dimas, which was the first American-born director of the GNTO, asked at that point Lois, who was a very well-known advertising agent. I saw also that he gave an interview 2 years before he died, saying that we should use this campaign again if we want to rebrand Greece, asking him to be able to take over the campaign in the States so he can remedy the situation as it was. What he did was that he got 37 actors and sport personalities. No one was Greek. Many of them had never done a commercial, and they went on camera in exchange for a week's trip to Greece. They were not paid, yes. Zelina did this where, have you seen The Dictator when he said like kill him? Anyways, so in the sport here, and I'm finishing this, it says going home to Greece. And the idea was exactly this. See this, that was... My folks went to Liverpool straight from the farming country. Now I'm going home to Greece. My grandparents came to America from Ireland. And now this Dubliner is going home to Greece. My great-grandfather came to this country from Oslo, Norway, and now I'm going home. Greece, the birthplace of Western civilization. That's why every American feels at home when they say Greece. My ancestors went from Spain to Puerto Rico. Greece. My mother was born from Portia on this wonderful America. Now I'm going home on to Greece. Only the is the national capital of Greece. Sunlight cruises with small beaches of the Greek Islands. America, go home to Greece. So Lois at the time said this was the most imaginative campaign ever. That was not true. The same campaign was run by Olympic Airways in 1967. You were born in Greece. So you see how this inter-exchange of ideas happens again and again. So just for a conclusion, this was the you were born in Greece in 67. And then last thing about the conclusion I want to mention before I finish. There are three major things that come up. First of all, there is huge value in the quantitative analysis. And I think we need to talk more with digital humanities and be able to incorporate it into our work to get a bigger picture of what we can do with our qualitative and critical discourse analysis, which are equally important. The other issue is that there is a very complicated relationship, which we have to do a much harder job to unearth between state, company, advertisers, graphic designers, and other creative directors. The other one is that, of course, you see a lot of things that you already expected. The winning here, the unbeatable bear of advertising is geography and history. It appears again and again throughout the whole corpus. But also what I think is interesting when we look at advertising, we talk about in the poster, is that we have to think we cannot measure the impact, but what we know is not just how many travelers made it into the country, but the marketing campaign was also promoting a sense of imagined community, of potential travelers who were reading the newspapers, would not travel, but they would create an idea of what Greece stood for. And the other thing I think we need to be doing more is that we have to move away from binaries. This is not just ancient or modern. Actually, there is a better way if we look at hybridization of different kind of elements and move away from the binaries. That's it. I'm sorry I was so late. Thank you. We'll do a quick round.
May, as a chair, use my right, because I really believe that this deserves to have some discussion.
It's true, but this is a very dangerous session. You have to restrain me, and then you have to restrain Alexander.
I will do my best.
And then, then we will
I'll allow this hard task to me, please. I have a plane.
Yes.
You were so fast because this was fascinating information and would like to enjoy more.
All of my students say that.
Okay.
It's a constant thing in my evaluations, but I carry on. It's anxiety. I cannot help it.
Just some key points in brief. You argued, I do agree, evidently, that Olympic Airways was a non-state actor at the first place.
Yeah.
At the second level, we do understand that it acted as the long hand of the Greek state. So we should also always remember this dual capacity. Yes, Olympic Airways and Greek National Tourism Organization, for long, they did operate it together. We should always remember that. There was a supplementary basis for both. Even their offices were at the same buildings, I mean, worldwide. It's not a coincidence. You also, to give a more international dimension, the case of Pan American, the way you mentioned, and it deserves just a few words more, is very important because along with the Hilton hotel chains were the effective tools of the US soft powers for the second half of 20th century. There's a lot of much research has been conducted over this, and it's really fascinating still. I do agree. I'm not sure if you mentioned once or twice, yes, but probably Olympic Airways was the absolute Greek success in a way, I mean, for the second half of the century. A rhetoric question linking these ages with nowadays. What is the most successful example of national air carrier nowadays, globally? No, sorry, Turkish Airlines.
Turkish Airlines.
By far, Turkish Airlines. Just check the figures. You also made a note, and evidently we don't have to discuss about that, but we should keep it for future research, the role of the airport infrastructure. We do focus on the companies, but what about the airports? And I'm not, I will not focus only on the previous known as Hassani, later Ellinikon Airport, which was the major Athens airport for 50 years. I will also speak about the further network of Greek airports, which still, the history of this network is still completely unknown. It's virtually unknown. About the methodology was quite interesting, I have to admit, and maybe some of us would like to know more about this corpus technology. We're not very familiar. Very simple question, minor one. I remember in the 60s, you spoke about these keywords, Isle, Cyprus, and Israel. Very interesting. Very interesting. We cannot understand why during the 60s, destinations such as Beirut, Cairo, and Istanbul were major keywords, because these, the target audience of Olympic probably was focused on that more than in later periods. Istanbul, still there was many Greeks there. Beirut, the link with Greece was very strong until the early 70s. Very interesting, also the point with the lifestyle of the 60s and the fact that the Lambert Agency was also an agency for GNTO for some years, okay, in the campaigns. And the fact that at that time, Olympic Airways, also GNTO, they dared to open their campaigns to new and fresh perspectives. This was the spring of the swinging 60s, we should say that once. I mean, also related to the Kajurakis and Karabot stories. And then there was the end for many, many years. One last comment. What actually, if one wonders, what was the critical change from that, from this history of this epic adventure of Olympic Airways, because this is an epic history. Roughly, I was wondering, and I came to the conclusion that among others is the competition, is the tension of the competition worldwide. We should think it again. And the last one, just a figure and just an example to illustrate the situation from 1980s when 500,000 Americans came in Greece. I think it was 1984 or something. The next time 500,000 Americans came in Greece, it was last year, because then it was the Achille Laura hijack. Just made a simple reference, so maybe some from the audience that are not familiar with this story. This hijacking at the Achille Lauro, it was extremely costed a lot to the Greek tourism at that time. It took decades for the tourism flow from American to recover, just to remember. Thank you. Maybe if there are just a few questions, basic, more to clarify, addressed to Irini, because we can speak about the Olympic Airways also related to the second presentation, which is going to focus on the history of Olympic Airways. But please, if you have something that you believe that's Odysseus.
Το μικρόφωνο από εδώ.
It's my fault.
Are there any integrated campaigns? Because as far as I noted, the media planning was like this. Print ads were more like informative, full of information cues about the services, and et cetera. And maybe television advertisements were more sophisticated, promoting, using humorous content. Were there any integrated attempts in terms of advertising campaigns through the whole period that you examined?
Integrated by whom?
Between
the NGNTO and the Olympic Airways, you mean?
Not GNTO, the Olympic, either launched internationally or
the domestic with international.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there's no comparison. There's no integration between the domestic and the international. And also what I didn't mention is that there's a huge difference between the American audience and the European audience. That's not the same advertising. What they were running in the UK had nothing to do with what they were running in Le Monde, what they were running in Chicago Tribune or the New York Times. There is much more to be done about the differences of audience. Clearly, they were taking into consideration who they were advertising to which exactly audiences. And I think that's something to bear in mind as well, especially if you look at Chicago Tribune or the Globe and Mail in Canada, there seems to be much more diasporic tone than anything else. So clearly they're doing surveys and thinking who they could attract throughout the decades, but no integration between domestic and international. Good question, but yeah, there's nothing there. I thought there would be something.
Irini, I like your distinction between the advertisements in the Greek press and the foreign press. It is true that Aristotle Onassis and Professor Halaftis might be willing to talk about this issue more, wasn't that keen to advertise in the Greek press. And we haven't seen a lot of advertisements. When he did advertise, his companies advertised actually, where when he wanted to exercise some form of political pressure and bring closer some of the publishers of that time. That is why we do not see advertisements that are, strictly speaking, professionally made and not that creative. What we do see, and we see it in the specialized press of that time, let's say the maritime press of that time, we do see advertisements for niche markets such as maritime tourism or maritime crew tourism, etc. We do see some niche market advertisements, and those advertisements are very interesting in order for us to maybe review them and examine who was behind these.
No, you're right. And there's a huge literature we haven't talked about, and we're talking with Jelena. There's nothing on cruise lines, and they were running a huge advertising campaign as well.
Niche markets, that was the only interest of Olympic Airways or his other companies, but not the general Greek press.
Yeah.
They were not that interested. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Should I step down so Jelena can take over?
One last question, maybe.
I'll be very quick. I have a million notes, but I'll just ask one question. You mentioned the partnership with British European Airlines.
The partnership between?
With British European
Yeah.
Airways. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's also Olympic also became part of Star Alliance, or
that was way afterwards, right?
Yes, this was in the 90s. Yeah. But what I'm asking is whether there was cooperation with other airlines in terms of either sharing campaigns or kinds of synergy,
Yeah,
or was there like
with
pure
Bea,
competition?
the Bea is the only one I've seen, but I don't know what was happening with other when they were landing in France or they were landing in other countries. So there were pairing, pooling contracts, but I don't know if that, I haven't seen that reflected in advertising, but that could be easily the case because I haven't looked at the pooling agreements. That's something that maybe Alexandra can see. But in terms of what I saw in the newspapers, that's not at all. What was happening is that other airlines are promoting Greece. So you can get a sense of other airlines, if they're going to Greece, that they will run a campaign. And that is something I haven't seen, but I have got a glimpse of it.
Thank you for your presentation that I found very, very interesting. I have a question because I found very interesting what you said about that is a non-state actor, but at the same time, the advertisement that you saw up, and also I think you mentioned that other companies like Iberia in Spain were quite similar in terms of branding. But my question is then where is the difference between a non-state actor and a state actor? You know, like Iberia was a state-funded company, and I saw the advertisement and everything, and it was very, very similar. So
you're right. It took what we wanted to do an intra-Mediterranean comparison as well. So we have downloaded Alitalia and Iberia. And what is interesting is that they're not distinguishing themselves. They are following much more global trends than nationalistic trends. Initially, what they have. So it was a big question. Why are they not differentiating? And it's a big, and I don't know the answer, but I was struck as well about this commonality. That's why I applaud in the 80s. The same happens in the 50s. You get this, very artistic with cubic. It's exactly in Spain, in the same thing you have in Greece. They are following a globalized trend. And in the airlines, at least, it's not getting differentiated. You would be shocked if you look at the Thomas Cook leaflets on how they sell the Mediterranean, which photos they choose for each country. They are not, you could not tell which beach you're talking about. So it is a question when you're speaking to international audiences, how much you want to homogenize and not actually differentiate. And, sometimes there's not a story to tell, unfortunately, because there is such a quest from homogeneity.
Of course, I'm giving the floor to Jelena Harlaftis.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will take the opportunity after this next presentation to start to make a very short remark over your last comment, Irini. The reason Thomas Cook and the rest of the operators used to have this homogenizing blurred, not distinguishable images is exactly because they want to deviate their target audience from one destination to another without having any problems. So instead of addressing them to Greece, to fly them to Italy or whatever.
So I mean, does that include Lebanon or that kind of sometimes they're also promoting them as a Mediterranean?
Thomas Cook was a pioneer in this practice, which is now at an industrial, let's say, scale. To make this homogenizing somehow blurred approach so as to fit everything in one. Being able the external tourism demand.
Okay, good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, I am a practical person. This is why I run this institute. So we are 1.5 hours late. We have in half an hour lunch. So if we are going to put a lunch at 3 instead of 2, we have to have the next 3 presentations in absolutely strict 20 minutes. And then we have only half an hour for you to talk and for questions, which we want very, very much.
I will stick to this. It's 1:30, so
yeah,
following this.
Right. Okay. So now this is indeed my first attempt to. It's not the first, but it is the first sort of not total, but anyway, presentation to talk about from shipping to tourism. And of course, as you've realized, to reflect in other ways how to put the sea in the middle. The aim here is triple. Firstly, to bring out the fact that the transformation of the activities of the Aegean and Ionian maritime communities from shipping to tourism continues, in fact, their long-term relation to the sea. Πώς πάει αυτό το ρημάδι μπροστά? Επάνω. Okay, so the first one is to bring out the fact, yes, so it is the view from the sea, and talk to you a little bit about the history of the sea. These are small communities, societies of high mobility in the maritime communities, seamen that left their microcosm to reach out to the big world, and then the whole world learned about their microcosm and came to them. Secondly, to indicate that the maritime communities produced large capitalists, ship owners that invested in touristic businesses, developing Greek tourism, and the local islanders, whether on the island or beyond it, that they returned to invest on them. And thirdly, to analyze how the lifestyle of some Greek ship owners contributed into branding Mediterranean Europe. So what do I do? Oh, yeah. So just a few words. Brodel was the first, of course, to use the sea as a unit of research. I just want you to think, not forget, when we talk about Mediterranean, to remember that it is a sea. It's not just an icon, okay? And how the sea is not just a scenery, but has been a dynamic agent to what happened to tourism. So Brodel was the first to use the sea as a unit of research. And that was the history of land and sea, as we have it in tourism as well: environmental, urban, demographic, maritime, transport, political, social, and cultural history. And when you put the sea in the middle, then you go beyond political borders. So it's a total history. I was hit in 2000s by the wave of thalassology. We were maritime historians, we thought ourselves, okay, and suddenly we had all the world talking about histories of the seas. And it was all about an approach, a research in the United States, where you stopped having area studies, Middle Eastern studies, African studies, European studies, and you had histories of the seas, and sometimes disguised, and sometimes, many times, everything on the left has nothing to do with the sea. Okay, they just put the sea as a scenery, but these two are wonderful books that really talk about the sea. But this is another story. I just wanted you to think about this, because what is then the view of the sea? Because what is the grand design when we talk about Mediterranean, that we can talk about history, even of tourism, of shipping, of anything that holds it together, right? So the true history of the sea, wrote Frank Bresel, one of the patriarchs of maritime history, is that history, it is a history in which the sea is not just a mere setting, okay, it's not just there, Mediterranean, but it is also a main dynamic agent that produces this. So it's a design and it's a reinvention that I have made from Frank Bresel. So it is very simple. We have on the sea, how we approach the sea. On the sea, seamen, ships, navigation, sea trade, war, piracy, violence at sea, that is. Around the sea, maritime communities, islands, port cities, shipping, fishing, tourism. In the sea, fishing, maritime resources, environment, the seabed, even shipwrecks. Because of the sea, maritime transport systems, entrepreneurial networks, maritime empires, international national maritime institutions, policy, and about the sea, the maritime culture, heritage, ideology, myths, poems, the inspiration of the sea in art of all kinds. So let's say a few things about Greek history on the sea that starts not from thousands of years ago, but just from the 19th century. I'll start. So this category is the structure of the sea. Now we have Ionian and Aegean archipelagos with thousands of islands and islets, but it's the last 2-3 centuries, there are 120 of them that are inhabited. Out of this 120, 40 have been identified as naftotopy, or maritime centers, or maritime islands, because they have developed deep sea going vessels. All of them, and the 120 of them, have small boats and sort of short sea boats, sailing and afterwards. But it is these 40 that have gone to the world. And it is from the 18th to the early 20th century that they have developed a fleet that really runs cargoes, whether they're human cargoes or whether cargoes from the west, from the east to the west, from the Eastern Mediterranean Black Sea to Western Europe, and then from the beginning of the 20th century to the rest of the world. It is what the Greek historian Spiros has conceived and said this beautiful thing. It's like a dispersed a maritime city with the neighborhoods being the islands, okay? So there is an economic unity, complementarity, and so on. By 1870s, we have at least 500 shipping companies owning about 2,500 deep sea going vessels going beyond the Eastern Mediterranean, okay? And they, who then with the technology coming, steamships, they had to invest in steamships. And modernization and new technology destroyed all the sort of shipbuilding that was everywhere in all the islands, but it did not destroy Greek shipping. It reinvented it, right? So in the ones that were seafarers, that were captains of sailing ships, Karavokirides, they became captains and into the ships of the ones that made it to steamships. And today we have the world's biggest fleet and still, and with seafarers that are very experienced and come still many from these maritime islands. That was until 1980s, definitely. And until now, you have a lot of captains and officials that are working at the Greek-owned ships under many flags. Now, let's go around the sea, right? This is human societies that they're living from the sea and the implication this has on their societies. And it's true that the history of the sea cannot be written without these maritime communities and how they react to the changes. All right. So the Aegean and Ionian maritime communities nurtured maritime entrepreneurship in the 19th century and before that and after that, okay? In the first half of the 20th century, however, a lot of these prosperous island and coastal maritime communities witnessed the population drain with immigration to the main port cities like Piraeus, okay? Or abroad to the Americas or Australia or South Africa or somewhere else. What is highly interesting is that in these maritime communities, after the sailing ship era, they lost their primary maritime function. But in the second half of the 20th century, their populations were obliged to seek alternative sources of income. I still say that many of them continue to be seafarers working from Piraeus, but still having very strong relations with the islands. And this is what is amazing with that, made me, since 1980s that I've been working on Greek shipping. One of the first things I read was that the Greek ship owners go back to their island of origin to marry and to bury, okay? Still today. So they thus turned in a way from business of sailing to selling the sea in order to survive and get prosperity. Now, this is a map of 2023. I downloaded it. It says maps, or map of the best islands of Greece. Now, all the main maritime islands are among these best islands of Greece, okay? So I wonder, who invested in these touristic businesses of the islands? Were the big investors on the Greek islands? Were the big ship owners? Did they invest in their own island of origin? Did foreigners came? And I can tell you, foreigners in Chios is somebody from the next village, from another village, not from their own village, okay? And barbarians, meaning non-Greeks, okay? So, yeah. And small investors, we forget about them. We forget totally about them. They are seafarers that earn a lot of money, that come back and build their houses. They open tavernas, they build shops now, but they build small hotels and so on. Local islanders that do different jobs and see that you know it's profitable to go in tourism. Diaspora Greeks, we forget about those. They come back. They went away, but many come back to build on their islands. You know. And of course, foreigners, people from everywhere in the world that come to invest or just spend time on the Greek islands. So we have to remember the big hotels, the smaller hotels, but also the tavernas, the restaurants, the bars, the cafes, the shops, the rented cars, rooms to rent, small hotels, medium hotels, travel agencies, local cruises, yachting, boat fishing, suppliers, and ancillary to hotel businesses. If you have a hotel, you have somebody to clean them, somebody to get the meat, the eggs. A big hotel of 1,000 visitors, of 1,000 people per day needs about 10,000 eggs, okay, per day. Okay, so we forget about this, okay, running the business. Now, so I go to what I have work I have done when I started my study on Greek shipping. It was the investments of Greek ship owners in the Greek economy. And I had then calculated the importance of shipping capital in tourism. So this is the evolution of the arrivals. It has been, Irini also talked about that. You have in red the world, on the left hand side the millions, and on the right you have the rise of Greek arrivals in Greece, and you see how it was caught up with world and even surpassed it. So the pace is much quicker here. So, and what I calculated here is that Greece's largest capitalists, the ship owners, in 1975 owned 20% from total investments in hotels. I calculated from ICAP of that time, and more than 35% of luxury hotels. Where they come from? Well, from Chios, Stratis Andreadis, J.C. Karas, Andris Brothers, Peratikos, Xilas, Liras, I'll give you my book. Andros, from Andros, Polemis and Kirtatas, Kefalonia, from Kefalonia, Andreas Potamianos and Tipaldos, and Kiathos Frangistas, Santorini, the Nomikos, from Crete, Mamidakis and Vardinogiannis, from Samos that you cannot see as Inglesis, and so on. Now, it hotels in Athens. I mean, the Hilton belonged to the Andreadis group. The Caravel belonged to the Greek ship owner. The JD Meridian that became Plaza belongs to the Vardinogiannis. Handris built in Chios, on their home island, in Corfu, in Athens, and other places. John Karas built at least 3 or 4 or 5 hotels in Halkidiki. Nomikos had his hotel in Atlantis, just to name a few, okay? And you have a new trend, you have a new influx of ship owners, of new businessmen that enter shipping from the late 1960s. And they started investing in trendy touristic islands, buying houses. It has to be, you have to be in the jet set. So Corfu is actually, the royalty was there. So all the upper class had to have a house in Corfu. And they're all, you don't know about them, that I realized how many ship owners own houses in Corfu. And of course, Spetses, all the old, beautiful homes of the Karavotirides, of the sailing ship owners of the 18th and 19th century are almost bought by ship owners, and from Hydra, and of course Mykonos. And of course, traditional ship owners invested on their houses in their maritime islands in many ways. You know, Kefalonia, Ithaca, Andros, Chios, Inousses, the smallest and the richest island in the whole world. No, not richest, but owned by the richest people. You know, Santorini, Leros, Kiathos, Syros, and Sifnos in Kassos, which is almost as big as Hydra and has so many ship owners. So, and you also have return of American, Australian, South African Greeks that come back and invest not only on their retirement. I'll give you a small Othoni. It's a tiny little island on the top of Corfu, and we made a small study research with my students there, and there was this 85-year-old wonderful old man sitting under a nice olive tree, and he told us his story that he, of course, embarked on Gouladry's ships and worked on them on 15 years, and after that he got off illegally to New York, and then he said, I washed so many dishes as the pebbles down the beach. Okay, but he got money after that, and he came back and he made a beautiful home, and then a taverna, his son, and so on in the Othoni. Limnos, half of them are in South Africa. Kalimnos, they come back and they build hotels and so on. So I won't go on with this. Now, cruising. You already mentioned, it was already mentioned here. I mean, Greek ship owners contributed to the development of cruises. You know, on total in the world, tourist arrivals, tourist arrivals in Greece then was 10 to 15% cruise passengers. Okay, and the development of cruising went in hand with the dying of passenger lines, of which many passenger ships were converted, and Greeks were pioneers. Semiramis is the first cruise ship that did cruises in the Aegean and introduced kind of mass tourism there. Okay, and introduced collaborating with EOT, which is the GIT, right? Now, after all this, we go to what I've been working in the last years with the archive, or the Onassis archive, which has given me great pleasure, and in seeing what has been happening here with the fact that how did these big, very known people influence branding Greek islands? I mean, Onassis owned Scorpios, and there is a statue that to honor him was made by the people of Nidri, because Nidri wouldn't exist without Scorpios, and Lefkas wouldn't be known without Scorpios, right? Because it was attended by all these very important visitors. And it's not only Onassis that has an island, it is the Petali and Empirikos, I think since the interwar period, and Koronida by Livanos, of Kranidi, and Spetsopoula by Niarchos, right? So, and yachting, which is maybe it's this heritage that we have, that became from an exclusive right of the very rich people to the many. So you see the democratization of this, all right? So, and you have the most emblematic yacht of the 1950s. And I just ask, can one man make a difference, or can a group of people make a difference? It seems that Onassis, with his famous yacht Christina on the one hand and Skorpios on the other island on the other, promoted Greece as a touristic destination more than anybody at his time in the 50s and 70s. And although he came from Smyrna, his success was connected completely with Greek maritime heritage, as through his friend Kostas Gratsos, who used Ithacan seamen. In the 1950s, there were no important Ithacan ship owners, so Onassis as many ships as you want, but if you don't have the know-how, if you don't have the seamen to run them, you can't do anything about them. So he became an adopted seaman, and his relations with his seamen are notorious. And of course, no coincidence that he bought Skorpios just a few miles from Ithaca, right? But it was also Christina that made the difference. It was his companion, the last 2 decades of his life, and it has been described, his refuge, his house, and so on. It is worth noting that Onassis did not have luxurious homes to indicate, or big villas or castles or whatever. He bought his first apartment in Avenue Foch when he was 55 years old, but he had Christina, okay? And he became very famous after 1954. Okay, when he was already 50 years old. So when he became Mr. Monte Carlo, right? So the voyages of Christina had a collateral positive impact on the touristic promotion of Greece. Aristotle Onassis developed this great interest in tourism since 1940s. Alexandra might mention this in her presentation. And it should not be forgotten that in the 1950s, in the immediate post-war period, tourism on the islands of Greece was at its infancy. And during this period, it began to develop with a certain targeted destinations promoted by the newly constituted Greek State Tourism Organization, EOT, and the Greek state, okay? And of course, Onassis bought Olympic Airways, and he made it a worldwide company, okay? So wherever Christina sailed, it was a mobile advertisement for the beauty of the Greek coast, of the islands, of the archaeological sites. Now, this is from the maiden voyage of Christina. We have this, all this evidence comes from the Onassis archive, and it was transformed by Cesar Pinau. It was a frigate, a war-built ship, and he started with his family on board. And this is the logbook of Christina. We have all the logbooks of Christina. And the maiden voyage started from Kiel on July 1954. It went down to Lisbon, entered Gibraltar, docked to Malaga, and then Portofino, and then it went to 23 August, went to Monte Carlo, with Piraeus as its destination, going through Napoli, Palermo, Castello, Capri, Trabi, and Messina. And he went to Corfu. There he just, took his hydroplane, went to see deal with some business, and came back on board again, sailing in the Aegean, through Ionian Sea, passing through the Corinth, going down Delphi. Masses of journalists were following Christina wherever it anchored. Okay, docked to Piraeus, and then went further to the Cyclades and Crete. It also, because the base was on Monte Carlo, then it also went to all the Riviera, Italian Riviera, French Riviera, to all the coasts, to all the islands of the Mediterranean, to the Spanish coast. It went also to the Caribbean. It also went to Adriatic and so on. And with him and Christina, he sailed with a lot of passengers. We have all the passengers lists, okay? So we have, of course, Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly, famous ladies of time, the sort of influencers of the time, Countess Vivian Stokes Crespi, Maharani, Baroda of India, Prince Stanislav Radzivil, who was married to the sister of Jackie Kennedy, who made the connection. A business world on board. We have the creator of Dom Perignon, the president of Moët Chandon. We have Fiat director and owner Giovanni Agnelli. We have fashion Herrera Guevara. We have Tiffany, the Jean-Marc Schmusberger of Tiffany on board. We have as well, you know, the warden of St. Anthony's College in Oxford, Françoise Sagan and her husband, Katina Paxinou. We have also Arias and Margot Fontaine. We have Greta Garbo, for which he is extremely fond of, okay, at the age of 53. And of course, Churchill, you know, the most emblematic and frequent guest was Winston Churchill, who, like Biden, did his last round, if Biden does it, until 84 years old. And when he finished, he went for the next 6 years on board Christina every year around the Mediterranean. Hordes of photographers and reporters followed, right?
24 minutes, but we still want to hear you.
Okay, it's finished. So it's Maria Callas and of course Jackie. You all know Jackie loved the ancient temples. And also of course Maria Callas, and of course his lifestyle. All right, over Greek and international press. Levedopedo Aristo, which is a Greek song. They say it was written for him, and the fact that he's the first Greek ship owner that does not play it, you know, snob. And I don't want to have anything to do with the Greeks that are Levantines and, you know, second-rate citizens. Okay, and he was at Maxim's, and he drank Dom Perignon and caviar, but he preferred ouzo and his alatismena kutia, which is this. So this is the last thing. So this is the last thing, that is the Greek ship owners on an international scale and maritime communities of the Aegean and Ionian Islands on a national and local scale contributed in branding the Mediterranean along with national touristic state policies. And my presentation is not to forget about it. It is the relation to the sea. Is this, yes, a long tradition of outward looking to the world, where the sea around is not isolation, but routes of communication and means of living. And Greeks knew about that. Thank you.
I will resist the temptation to make any comment or question, and I'll skip it, and I'll go to the next presentation, which is going to be, I think it's Ilias Bisias, Panagiotis Korakas. No, it's Alexandra? Because we have changed it. So please allow me to execute my task. Mr. Bisias, Mr. Korakas, I assume Maria Lekakou is not here today, as far as I can see. She couldn't make it. The floor is yours. Please. You want?
Ελίνα, πού το έφερες? Το βρήκα, το βρήκα. Κάνα πατήσω εδώ πάνω. Απλά έξω. Εδώ, εντάξει. Να αλλάξουμε την κάμερα, να κάτσετε κάτω τελικά όλοι. Α, οκ. Όχι, πρέπει να έχεις το μικρόφωνο εδώ.
Εδώ. Πού με το εντάξει. Mr. Chairman, Professor Halaftis, professors, dear colleagues, the present study aims to present the shipping policies pursued by the Greek state in the first years after the end of Second World War, which had two parallel and complementary objectives. The restoration of the Greek passenger shipping fleet, which had been almost utterly destroyed during hostilities, and also the strengthening of the country's tourist industry, especially in coastal areas at the end of the same period. The main focus of this paper is to examine Greece's shipping policy during the 1940s and 50s. By shipping policies, we choose to characterize the actions of a state that encourage, permit, or formulate measures that control or interfere with the free market rules of the shipping industry. And indeed, the international shipping industry, for reasons that are not deemed necessary to be presented in the current analysis, many maritime nations such as Greece and Norway have become important players without relying on protectionist regimes, but instead implementing liberal policies favoring free markets and free enterprise. In general, a state's shipping policy is said to aim towards the increase of employment, the raise of real income, and the improvement of the balance of payments and the terms of trade. The methods used to implement these policies include direct subsidies for construction, improvement, scrap and build schemes, and the cost of the operation of ships, but also indirect subsidies such as loans, exemption from income taxation, general tax privileges, investment allowances, etc. In this respect, our research has focused on the policies of the Greek state during a specific period that led to an increase not only of the number of passenger vessels introduced in the Greek seas, but also the improvement of the quality of the services offered. Also under examination is the final impact of these policies on the number of passengers transported to, and especially from Italy, a highly coveted market for the expansion of Greek tourism and thus a main aim for the Greek government. The research specifically took under consideration the so-called Mediterranean passenger shipping sector. But what is the definition of a Mediterranean passenger vessel? Commercial ships that have as a starting point, final destination, or intermediate arrival at a port outside Greece, mainly in the Mediterranean Black Sea or Red Sea, are considered to be Mediterranean vessels. These are referred to as Mediterranean vessels in the articles of that period. Passenger ships operating in the wider region with calls at ports inside and outside Greece are classified as part of the Mediterranean passenger shipping industry. On the other hand, the coastal passenger shipping fleet includes all passenger and car ferry ships that operate exclusively in the Greek seas and connect, for example, the islands with mainland Greece. In general terms, Mediterranean passenger shipping can be described as that which connects the major Greek ports with those of the Mediterranean. Therefore, the geographical area of activity and commercial operation of these ships is referred to as wider than that of Greek coastal shipping. Although a multitude of studies and articles have been written about Greek ocean-going shipping, Mediterranean passenger shipping has not received similar research attention. This research attempts to shed light to little-known chapter of the history of this particular segment. As an essential source for the present research were both the archives of issues of Naftika Chronika magazine, a printed publication circulating in Piraeus since 1931, but also relevant studies and reports conducted during the period in question. Most of the latter can be found in the library of the non-profit company that is under establishment and aims to preserve the archives of Naftika Chronika and the Eugenides Foundation. Greek merchant shipping emerged from the turmoil of the Second World War with unbearable losses in terms of mariners and vessels. Greek passenger shipping did not escape the painful consequences of the war, and it can be said that the sector almost completely disappeared. More specifically, before the Italian invasion in 1940, there were 45 Greek passenger ships, of which 37 were in service. The survival of only 4 passenger ships after the cessation of hostilities is indicative not only of the sacrifices endured by Greek passenger shipping during the war, but also of the huge gap created in regard to the country's maritime transportation networks in the early post-war years. The sentiment that prevailed throughout the Greek shipping community, as reflected by the maritime press and the official administrative authorities, was the imperative need for restoration. Until 1947, and with the country in the midst of a civil war, it is clear that the immediate priorities of the Greek government were not the restoration of the country's passenger shipping sector. Despite this initial neglect of on the government's part, passenger shipping seemed to attract the interest of important and experienced, as well as newly established and emerging ship owners of the time. More importantly, ship owners with no prior experience in the Greek passenger shipping sector were reported to have shown a keen interest in this potentially lucrative market. In this respect, in 1946, Aristotle Onassis proposed an exclusive right for his companies to exploit commercially all domestic passenger shipping routes, with no success, however. The event that would lead to the change of the political framework in the Ministry of Merchant Marine in Piraeus and the strategic political decision to strengthen the Greek passenger shipping industry was the signing of the peace treaty between the Allies and Italy in 1947. The amount of reparations in favor of Greece amounted to $105 million, US dollars, that is. Among the different types of reparations, the building of new passenger ships in Italy was proposed at the suggestion of the Minister of Merchant Marine, Theodore Kizanis. This initiative ultimately led to the construction of 4 coastal passenger vessels and 2 Mediterranean passenger ships. At this point in time, the Greek legislature, although aimed to adopt new policies for the revival of the coastal fleet, new legislation for the construction of the Greek Mediterranean passenger fleet also emerged. The Specialized Maritime Press of Piraeus closely followed the Italian reparations case, occasionally criticizing the decisions of the Greek state, mainly due to the high cost of shipbuilding in Italy compared to other shipbuilding countries in Europe. The provision of raw materials by the Greek side, but also the somewhat insufficient inspection of the shipbuilding process by the Greek authorities. Despite these criticisms, it was always pointed out that the addition of new buildings to the Greek passenger shipping sector would significantly benefit the national economy, internal trade, and regional development. The reparation new builds of the bilateral agreement of 31 August 1941 were a starting point for the Mediterranean fleet. After the ships had been built and delivered, the Greek government was to sell them by public auction under certain conditions and procedures. Almost a year and a half after the agreement, the first of the coastal passenger ships was launched at the Monfalcone shipyards in Trieste. The 4 newly built coastal passenger shipping vessels of the Italian reparations would be the Niaulis, the Canaris, the Karaiskakis, and the Kolokotronis. All were delivered in 1952 after a series of required retrofittings. The initial tender for the auction sale of the newly built passenger ship Canaris is of particular interest as the main of the legislators were to offer the vessels exclusively to Greek entrepreneurs, but not necessarily to ship owners. The minimum bidding price of the vessel to be sold was set at $1.4 million. The initial 2 auctions of the vessels were not a success. Traditional families in the Greek passenger shipping industry would show an interest in the new buildings only in the 3rd auction. In the final auction of the Niaulis, Canaris, and Karaiskakis, the Thraiki Atouploia acquired these vessels, and the Nomikovs family acquired the Kolokotronis. The purchase of these vessels can be viewed as the first form of indirect subsidy of the Greek state towards this segment of the country's passenger shipping industry during this particular period. The auction of the 2 Mediterranean new buildings, the Achilles and Agamemnon of Italian reparations delivered to Greece by late 1953 and early 1954, would prove to be an even more intricate matter. While at first there were discussions for the signing of an agreement between the Special Committee of the Ministry of Merchant Shipping and the representative of a Greek coastal shipping company, IMS, for the annual lease of the 2 ships, the ministry then decided to auction the 2 vessels to any interested company. On the basis of the bid submitted, the relevant authorities on the 27th November of 1953 announced that the P. Nomikos company would require both vessels. On the last day of 1953, the first of the 2, the Achilles, entered the port of Piraeus for the first time, inaugurating a new era in the commercial exploitation of the Greece-Italy routes. The Achilles was launched on the Corfu, Brindisi, Venice, Trieste line and the Agamemnon on the Genova-Marseille line. Both ships would also introduce the Alexandria, Limassol, Beirut line. The Achilles and Agamemnon remained for 5 years under the management of the Nomikos family. Company debts, as well as the professional incompatibility of Markos Nomikos as an MP and entrepreneur, led, however, both ships to be returned to the Greek state. And at this point, we see again Onassis entering this market. The signing of an agreement between the General Accounting Office in the Ministry of Finance of Greece and the newly established company Olympic Cruises would lead to the acquisition of the two ships by Onassis. Under the crest of Olympic Cruises, the Achilles continued its voyages to Greece, from Greece to Brindisi and Venice until 1963, attracting the attention of the international tourist markets. The Olympic Cruises international and flamboyant marketing campaigns of that period advertised that tickets holders had the possibility to combine the voyages with flights operated by the luxury planes of Olympic Airways. The new buildings of the Italian reparations would thus usher a new era and created campaigns that would not only promote Greece as a desirable tourist destination, but would also encourage foreign tourism to Greece. The procurement of these vessels can also be viewed as a form of an indirect subsidy of the Greek state towards the local passenger shipping industry. These 6 passenger vessels would also provide, for the first time, as reported in national press, not only a much awaited means of civilized accommodation for passengers, but also regularity and punctuality in departures and arrivals of vessels in Greek ports, providing suitable connections with other means of transport. The Achilles and Agamemnon were probably the most advertised vessels of that period, as they would regularly appear in Greek films during the golden era of Greek cinema, showcasing a new and modern, comfortable way of traveling in an era of expansion for tourism in the Mediterranean. Panagiotis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ilias. Tourism in the 1950s would emerge as a rapidly advancing industry at a time when Greece was facing crucial social problems, especially in rural areas. Insufficient absorption rate of the country's growing active population year after year resulted in high numbers of underemployed and unemployed people. Within that context, Greece gradually entered a new period in which tourism is referred to as a national affair for the development of areas all over the country. The shipping industry's link with tourism would thus eventually grow closer and closer day by day. The tourist traffic growth towards Greece would steadily increase from the mid to late 1950s onwards. The main sources of the tourist flow were mainly citizens from North and Western European countries. An important factor of this phenomenon was the emergence of the privately owned automobile that allowed travelers to reach anywhere the European road network allowed them. Consequently, the shipping community's interest during that period would focus on the launching of car ferries in order to exploit the growing tourist presence of European citizens, whose cars enabled them to discover new destinations. With the re-establishment of the Greek National Tourism Organization in the early 1950s, the effort to develop tourism in the country was resumed in a more systematic way after the end of World War II. According to GNTO data, in 1950, about 35,000 foreign tourists entered Greece, while in 1957, this number reached 250,000. According to official data, tourist foreign exchange also soared. As reported, the direct impact of the increased tourist traffic, domestic and foreign, helped cover a large part of the balance of payments deficit by the inflow of foreign exchange, while a significant number of hotels, restaurants, entertainment centers, and other related businesses emerged and were subsequently strengthened. According to national statistics, of the 250,000 foreign travelers who entered Greece in 1957, 80,000 of them arrived by passenger vessels under Greek or foreign flag, mostly during the summer period, with an equal number arriving by plane all year round, while 90,000 of them arrived by road from the northern and northern-eastern borders of the country. It's worth noting that despite efforts by the GNTO to promote Greece abroad, it is reported that most widespread advertising campaigns in foreign markets were carried out by privately owned companies and travel agencies. As far as competition from foreign passenger ships, especially in routes in the Adriatic Sea, the Greek Mediterranean vessel had to compete with many new-built ships of Italian and Yugoslav interests. A non-paper by the Greek consul in Venice at that time is revealing. During a 1-month period in the summer of 1959, ships of the Italian flag carried 1,926 passengers. Yugoslav vessels carried 1,016 passengers, while Greek flagged ships carried 1,006 passengers. Therefore, on the Venice-Greece route, the Yugoslavs are referred to as the most direct competitors of Greek Mediterranean vessels. It was also reported that the competitive advantage of the more luxurious yet expensive Italian vessels was the direct access to a more upper-income market, especially in Italy. This is an indicative table showing the rise in numbers of international passengers disembarked at all Greek ports. And the increase is evident starting from about 1955 to 1956. The growing number of passengers traveling to Greece from Italy, as well as the direct competition from new entrants, led the GNTO to conceive a strategy in order to safeguard and promote Greek maritime interests in the Adriatic and Ionian seas. The building and commercial operation of the car ferry Egnatia is a landmark for both the Greek passenger shipping and tourism industries. For the first time in its history, the Greek NGTO decided to acquire a modern Mediterranean ship to meet the new and growing needs in sea transportation. This political initiative was planned and agreed upon in conjunction with Italian passenger shipping company Adriatica. More specifically, the Greek National Tourism Organization and Adriatica initially agreed to provide a newly built ship each, 2 in total, for the commencement of voyages on the Brindisi, Corfu, and Igoumenitsa route during the summer of 1960. On the Italian side, the new built car ferry was the Appia, which would eventually begin its voyages from Greece on 29th of May, 1961. These two almost sister ships were built in different yards, but had the same characteristics in terms of tonnage, service speed, and layout. The Egnatia project and the significant advantages it would procure for Greek tourism were widely reported upon by the Greek press, since a car ferry link between Greece and Italy would enable European tourists owning a private automobile to extend their trip from Italy to Greece in just a few hours and at a relatively low cost. While still being constructed, the Egnatia was reported to have been purchased by IMS, for a fee of a bit over $3 million. IMS is referred to as a company with extensive experience in the successful operation of Mediterranean vessels. This transaction again can be viewed as a form of indirect subsidy of the Greek state towards the operators of Mediterranean vessels. Launched in February 1960, Egnatia would begin her voyages in August of the same year. The Greek government's agreement is described by media reporters as beneficial for all parties involved, as it avoided any form of competition between the two parties. This was achieved by the equal sharing of all profits. Besides, any attempt at competition would be rather detrimental for the Greek side, as the Italian government had always directly or indirectly subsidized its passenger ships, as highlighted by a Greek official in a special report. The development of traffic from and especially to Igoumenitsa also brought about the carrying out of improvement works for the port, accommodation facilities, and general infrastructure in an underdeveloped area of Western Greece. Moreover, the growing passenger flows led to regional development and support for other sectors of the economy and transport, especially in regions with high unemployment rates such as Epirus and the Peloponnese. From 1961 onwards, the newly built Mediterranean vessels would dominate the interest of the European tourist who wanted to explore this part of the Mediterranean. During the summer of 1961, the number of passengers and cars transported by the Egnatia were indicative of the popularity of newly built Mediterranean vessels in the Adriatic. Between Greece and Italy, the vessel had carried 44,834 passengers and 8,838 cars in a matter of few months, record numbers for that period. The number of passengers carried out during the following years was also impressive, as you can see from the table. Let's move onwards with a few numbers and jump to the conclusions. Greek shipping policies in the 1940s and 1950s concerning the restoration of passenger shipping, and especially the Greek Mediterranean vessel, would prove beneficial for the re-emergence of a dynamic sector for the Greek shipping industry. These carefully planned and continuous policies of the Greek government aimed to restore the Greek passenger fleet, coastal as well as Mediterranean, and to introduce tourist flows from the newly established markets of Western and Central Europe towards Greece. Tourism during the decades in focus emerged as a rapidly advancing industry during a developing yet fragile period for the Greek economy. The implementation of these policies by the government in Athens offered through indirect subsidies and initiatives for traditional players of the Greek shipping industry and new entrepreneurs, as seen with the example of Aristotle Onassis in passenger shipping. It gave them the opportunity to enter a highly competitive market and thus supporting a tourist boom in the years to come. As tourism grew to the status of a national affair, as we said before, the shipping industry, and especially the Mediterranean vessel, proved to be the cornerstone for the development of passenger traffic in the Adriatic and Ionian seas, and an important pillar for the economy of many regions in Greece, especially in the western coastline of the country. The development of the Greek passenger shipping industry through the efforts to establish a modern Greek Mediterranean passenger fleet resulted in a new era for the emergence of Greece as an important destination for the global tourism industry. In this respect, as a report of the National Bank of Greece concludes in 1961, Greek passenger ships do not simply serve the international maritime traffic of passengers, but also create it. Thank you very much.
Also have to thank our two colleagues here. And I assume that we have to go to the last, the final presentation with Mrs. Papadopoulou, right?
Yes.
Who is going to speak about Olympic Airways again, between the Greek state and the Onassis Business Group, the foundation and evolution of the Greek national flag air carrier.
Can we please take off the
Alexandra, you have to open your.
Yes, I can see the previous presentation. This is
Here,
my-
yeah, we'll take it off, but I can see you now.
Okay.
Alexandra, have you sent the presentation or are you going to share your
So
presentation?
I'm gonna share my screen.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Excellent. Just 1 minute. Okay. So hello, everyone.
No, Alexandra, you are fine. We have to fix it here.
Okay.
Και αυτή είναι η προηγούμενη. Δεν χρειάζεται να κάνουμε τίποτα. Αυτό δεν έχει να κάνει. Γίνεται εδώ, από εκεί. Να το ενώσει εκεί. Αλεξάνδρα, το έχεις κάνει share τώρα. Α, εσύ το έχεις κάνει, πάλι δεν το βλέπουμε.
Περίμενε μια στιγμή. Νομίζω, περίμενε να δοκιμάσω άλλη μια φορά. Να δω μήπως... Τώρα.
Ναι, ναι, εσύ το έχεις κάνει σωστά. Τώρα να το ενώσουμε εμείς. Εσύ εντάξει, Αλεξάνδρα.
Οκ.
Γεια σου, Αλεξάνδρα μας.
Γεια σας.
Όχι, το βλέπω ξεκινάει. Ναι, ναι.
I think we can start.
Okay.
Alexandra, are you ready?
Yes, of course.
Let's go then.
So hello, everyone. I'm Alexandra Papadopoulou. I would like to, first of all, to thank Jelena and Irini for inviting me in this workshop. I will speak today for Olympic Airways, but from, I think, a slightly different perspective from the one that Irini has done in the previous presentations. So my main point of interest is the formation of Olympic Airways and its evolution as a Greek flag air carrier, but in its hybrid form between national interests and the corporate strategy of Onassis Business Group. So let me just check how I'm move this. Just okay, you can see it, I suppose. So first of all, we all know, I think, Olympic Airways through Aristotle Onassis. These two names have been combined since the very beginning. In the public opinion, in the public sphere, the perception of Olympic Airways related to the Onassis Business Group has been more of, it was explained more like an irrational passion, irrational investment, and not exactly as a strategic investment of the group in general. So I'm just having here a slide mentioning two phrases. The one that Onassis has mentioned before his death, that shipping is my wife, but airlines is my mistress, he used to say. And another one coming from his heir, Alexander Onassis, the ships bring the bread, but I prefer the aircrafts. So this is like a good projection, I think, of the notion around why the Onassis Business Group chose to invest in aviation industry. But first of all, I would like to say a few things about the project I'm involved in, and which is part of this paper is actually the outcome, one of the results of this wider research I'm participating in. So my main point of interest in this research was the interplay between the multinational corporation, in particular the Onassis Business Group, and state agency, state planning also, concerning in specific air transport as an industry, and also tourism. And of course, when we are talking about this interplay, we are talking, of course, about the formation of Olympic Airways. In general, aviation industry, but in specific also Olympic Airlines have not been studied in the past. We have some works done, but unfortunately they are very dispersed. There is no organized, so far it has been no organized archival series, so it was very difficult for researchers to approach this field of study. And fortunately, through the formation of the Onassis Business Archive, we have at least some series that we can depend on in order to provide at least one part of the narrative surrounding Olympic Airways. So for this research, for this paper also, I was based mostly on parts of the Onassis Business Archive. You can see in the screen what type of archives these are, but also newspaper articles and newsletters issued by Olympic Airways or in general, and of course many formal official papers issued concerning the agreement between the Greek state and the Onassis Business Group, and several similar official documents related to the change in the agreement between the two agents. So the main thing, my first question when I approached the archive, because I'm seeing Olympic Airways through the lens of a multinational business group and especially a shipping business group. So this was quite important for me to see it as part of, as an investment made by private interests that were not previously involved in aviation industry. So the first question I posed was why a shipping business group would get involved in such a an economic field, an economic sector. And I made I'm making here also a proposal that three were the main actually factors that affected the decision making in the Onassis Business Group to get involved in this project. First of all, and I think this is crucial, is about the political leverage that getting involved into Olympic Airways had as an advantage for the Onassis Business Group. Olympic Airways was a very capital-intensive investment, highly controlled and monitored by the state. This was not very well appreciated by shipping groups, not at that time, not also today. But this was a very important investment for the Onassis Business Group, exactly because it was a strategic investment that could, first of all, grant access to the shipping group to an emerging and growing industry, that of tourism. And this is, I think, my linkage to the specific workshop. Also, to get access and legitimization in the national base of Greece. Onassis, at that point, his main business interests were outside the Greek nation. So it was a huge shift to get contacts and re-emerge in the national sphere, but also gaining access through the project of Olympic Airways to investments that were taking place at that time. They were available at that time in the Greek state and have some political leverage in order to get involved in these projects. So I would like, first of all, to provide you with a timeline, some basic dates surrounding the formation and the evolution of Olympic Airways. So Olympic Airways were founded in 1956 through the agreement between Aristotle Onassis and the Greek state. Of course, some of the most important dates from my perspective concerning the evolution of Olympic Airways is, of course, the consortium with BEA. It was mentioned before, with the British Airways. Also, the first transatlantic flight, which for me is the turning point for the evolution of Olympic Airways as an agent in the development of tourism. The formation of Olympic Aviation, which was the company that was formed by Olympic Airways in order to take over light aircraft and helicopter services, and of course the transfer in the end in 1975 to the Greek state. I'm providing this just to have an idea of how the company evolved, and which from my perspective are the main points of interest. So when we are talking about Olympic Airways, we are talking about a national flag air carrier, but actually we are talking about a private company gaining all the exclusive privileges and rights that were granted to national flag air carriers at that time. So in 1956, the agreement between the Greek state and Aristotle Onassis that would be also reflected in the documents related to the foundation of the company included specific exclusive rights. First of all, and most important from our perspective, to all air transportation of passengers and commodities under the Greek flag in the Greek territory and beyond. Also, handling and servicing foreign aircrafts that are landing in Greek airports. This is secondary to my perspective. Transport of mail, technical services to all aircrafts, but also it included a very important from the subject that we are exploring in this workshop, the purchase and operation of hotels and touristic facilities. So I'm going to focus on these two aspects of the agreement that led to the formation of Olympic Airways. But before going on, I would like also to provide you with some information about what were the advantages that an Onassis shipping group had to what were the advantages of the business group, of Onassis Business Group involvement in Olympic Airways and in aviation industry in particular. There are some emerging. First of all, we have to think that a global shipping group like Onassis Shipping Group was at that time, had of course access to global financial institutions like Citibank, and it used that access in order to finance the infrastructure for the creation of this huge, international air transport network. The introduction of legal instruments, what I call institutional infrastructure, that were introduced in the Greek context from shipping. This also involved the use of offshore companies that were actually connected, that were actually part of the shipping group, and they were used extensively in transactions of Olympic Airways with also the aircraft manufacturers, but also with the financial institutions I mentioned before. Of course, the knowledge of foreign markets. Shipping Group at the time had normally presence in London, in New York, one of the biggest international markets of that time, but also elsewhere. And also it provided linkages to other sectors, which are very important. We talked, the previous papers mentioned also the importance of shipping, for example, commercial and transporting people and travelers and so on. Also, through the Onassis Business Group, I think that this important capital, this international reputation and access to political and business lobbies was important because it was invested in this project, in the Olympic Airways. But also the shipping group had one other advantage that I think that there was also transmitted through to Olympic Airways, which was this mentality of introducing cutting-edge technology. So they were not hesitant of looking around and investing in cutting-edge technology, which was very important also in which is very important in aviation industry. When I said before that Olympic Airways, from my perspective, is a hybrid institution, what I meant was actually the fact that there was a big distinction between I didn't mean just the distinction between the privileges gained by Olympic Airways because of its status as a national flag carrier, but also because of the specific organization and structure of the business itself in its management. The most important thing that I've found out working in Olympic Airways is this distinction between the formal administration, like a board of directors, very formal, abided by the rules and the laws of the Greek state, and an informal structure, an informal management, which is very important also from our perspective, and you will see why the linkages to the tourist industry and through the people, through the agents, this informal management, which was it is not actually recorded anywhere, but there are people involved from the Onassis Business Group that actually are connected and are they have the substantial control of the company, of Olympic Airways, of its strategy for all the period that Onassis Business Group was involved. And the second aspect that I think is very important is also the entanglement, the connection between the Onassis Business Group, the people, the actors of the Onassis Business Group, and state institutions and planning, and especially related to tourism. I will mention some of these things further on. So, gaining access to Olympic Airways was for Onassis Business Group, as I said before, a strategic decision, a strategic investment. Throughout the period from 1956 up until 1975, there has been a series of many circles of negotiation between the Greek state and the Onassis Business Group related to the initial agreement about Olympic aviation. So this actually was used by the group as an open channel of negotiation with the Greek state. Its main goals are explicitly expressed throughout the period. First of all, okay, the expansion of financial support by the state, expansion of privilege, of tax exemptions, and limiting state control. This was one of the primary goals. The second one, which also is important on how Olympic Airways is used and is investing in the growth of tourism, has to do with securing the monopoly of Olympic Airways related to competition, and especially private charter carriers that were rising in the 60s and the 70s. The third, okay, forming labor relations according to the shipping standards is a big issue. I'm not going to mention it here extensively. And of course, gaining access to crucial infrastructure. We were talking before about the importance of infrastructure, of buildings, of airports in the development of tourism. This was a point that Olympic Airways pushed, and Onassis Business Group pushed through Olympic Airways throughout the period. And thirdly, and I think very importantly, is pushing in order to get more involved people of the group that participated in the management of Olympic Airways to get more involved into state planning on tourism, and which they actually achieved by participating in the National Organization of Tourism and other relevant bodies. So let's go to the direct connection. Let's talk a bit about the direct connection.
You have 3 more minutes.
Okay. About the connection between Olympic Airways and tourism. So I will be very brief in that part. First of all, Olympic Airways was seen by the Onassis Business Group as a tool, as a vehicle to get involved in an untapped economic sector like tourism. The vision of the group that was transmitted through Olympic Airways about their involvement in tourism has been explicitly expressed by Gerasimos Patronikolas, which was a vice president of Olympic Airways in 1964, that said, aviation, since our country was recognized in the international tourism market as a place for summer holidays, will always take the lead in the mobility of the wealthiest tourists especially. And he continued, and for the following very important reason, because the person who wishes to spend his 15-20 days of a vacation on a beach and to get a suntan is in no mood to waste 5 or 6 days on an Alere tour round trip. They want to reach their destination within a few hours and jump immediately into the sea. So I think if someone reads the whole article, which is published in 1964, they can see this vision of how Olympic Airways would through Olympic Airways, they would get involved in the touristic industry. And their vision was to create an integrated system of interconnected flights from international destinations to regional and local touristic destinations. The expansion, just to say a few things, the expansion of Olympic Airways in this direction is very evident from the beginning, the beginning of the agreement with the Greek state, that there were only 6 international destinations. Only a few years after, you can see here in the map the expansion of Olympic Airways in the European sphere, but also the exponential rise of people flying, passengers flying from domestic and international routes through Olympic Airways, as well as after the 1960s and the expansion of Olympic Airways in the transatlantic connection of Olympic Airways. You can see also the global expansion of the company throughout the world. Which are the main visitors, which are the passengers that Olympic Airways is attracting during that period? You can see that especially after the 1960s, you can see that US and Canada is forming a very large part of the passengers for Olympic aircrafts, which is also very important. But also, we can see that Olympic Airways, in spite of just attracting visitors or tourists from European or intercontinental destinations, you can see also the growth of a network of destinations that were linked also to Greek diaspora communities and Greek migrant communities that are actually growing in the 1960s. So you can see here the growth after the 1960s in passengers from European countries, a part of which are actually Greek migrants that have moved from Greece in order to work in Germany, for example, or Belgium and different other destinations, but also the rise of connections between Greece, the Elliniko airport, and Canada, Australia, US destinations. Part of this integrated system, of course, was not just connecting international destinations to the airports in Greece, but also connecting the airports with the regional and local airports that were not many around that time. So when in 1971, Olympic aviation is introduced, is founded, there has already been the organization by the Onassis Business Group. There was the organization, the necessary negotiations of securing the terms to make this step, to integrate the system to the local destinations. So you have already, there have been agreements between state officials and agents of the Onassis Business Group related to the establishment of the light aircraft and helicopters branch, of financial guaranteeing by the state in case of losses for the first period, and the creation of necessary infrastructure. So in 1968, when the predecessor of Olympic aviation is formed, the Light Aircraft and Helicopters Division of Olympic Airways, we have already the initiation of regional and local flights from Athens to Skiathos, Chios, Mykonos, Santorini, and Spetses, very familiar touristic destinations of that time. And after the foundation, we have expansion of flights also from Athens to Portocheli, Sparta, Rhodes, Karpathos, and Kos. And also this plan, this private business plan of the Onassis Business Group for the expansion to local destinations has also triggered a private initiative in order for the construction of new runways in many islands that were to that point secluded from tourism, like Kythera or Milos. So by the end of this period, we can see an increase of density in interconnected flights between established touristic destinations and also with newly founded destinations.
Alexandra, I'm sorry, but I will have to ask you to jump to your conclusions.
Yes, okay. So just to finish, to wrap it up, in 1975, unfortunately, as Irini also said before, it is very hard to evaluate the outcome of this strategy that I mentioned before. It is hard because it was disrupted in 1975. Of course, the reasons for this disruption was that the Olympic Airways was transmitted, was given to the Greek state. There have been many scenarios, many opinions expressed about why the Onassis Business Group chose to hand over Olympic Airways to the Greek state. Many have, in the public sphere, it has been connected to the loss of the life of Alexander Onassis. But of course, this is an issue to research it further. From my perspective, many factors have led to this sale, to this handing over of Olympic Airways. First of all, the oil crisis. Second of all, of course, the change in the political situation in Greece. Also, the fact that the Onassis Business Group also failed to get involved in more projects, in more investment projects in the country. And lastly, but not least, also the extremely rising competition in aviation, in civil aviation during that period. So this is something that I would like to invest more in the future and have a more definite conclusion about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for this coherent and solid presentation. And allow me to say that there were major points that you made through this presentation of vital importance for understanding the whole path, let's say, this company followed all these years. So I think I'll have to pass the floor for some discussion at the very end of this lengthy panel. Who would like to... Any questions or for anybody? Michalis Nikolakakis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Papadopoulou, for the wonderful presentation. It's very insightful. I would like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, perfect. I would like to ask you a question. Regarding your presentations on Olympic Airways, one of the main points that people had made about tourism in Greece and the Olympic Airways is obviously that the actual rise in Greece catching up with the international tourist trend was its integration into the system of charter aviation, which obviously, and you had made, you implied that at the beginning of your presentations, and obviously the way that the charter system worked is incompatible with the Olympic Airways. So, and you had, your presentation put a lot of content, a lot of material in to contextualize this transition. You have I totally agree with you with your insistence on the 1968 case, the 1968 change in the agreement within the Greek state and the company. What I would like to ask, but that change was about the effort to create a different form of transportation of tourism to the islands, which would be compatible with the monopoly privileges that the Olympic Airways had. So the question is, from the point of view of the policymakers, there are such signs, but my question is, do you see efforts of the still private Olympic Airways to adjust in the charter industry, to get to that industry, to invest to that industry, and to find a way around the barriers that this new economy proved? And especially, did they try to get subsidized for getting charters and not just national carriers? Thank you very much for that.
Let me collect some more questions, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much to all the presenters. A question first for Alexandra. You mentioned the hybrid nature of the Onassis Group and Olympic Airlines. I wondered about the crew. If much of the funding and finance is coming from Greek and international sources, are the crew themselves, the pilots, the staff, are they Greek or are they drawn from international? And a question for Elias and sorry guys, was in a similar vein. One of the things I always think of with shipping is the importance of things like insurance. And I wondered there, when you see these big Mediterranean partnerships, the construction of these boats, the creation of this transfer, is the insurance dealt with in a kind of Mediterranean sense, or is it sort of extractive, that money is going elsewhere to bigger financial houses and international capital, like we mentioned in this paper? Thank you.
Anybody else for the total of the discussion of the?
Thank you. I have two questions for Ilias and Panagiotis, actually. So the first one is GNTO was very proud of their port facilities, the new port facilities of Igoumenitsa, of course, designed in pristine modernism. Have you managed to find something about in the deal that was made about the respective port facilities in the times? And the second one is something that Irini mentioned earlier about how Olympic Airways saw the trip to Greece as part of the experience of Greece. Is there something similar in this in the ships? Is there something on the onboards entertainment and services that echoes Greekness? Yes, thanks.
Anybody else? Zelina.
For Irini, the torrent, Irini, and the bombardment of this marvelous information. But how about the first Greek? Well, it's not the first, but about the Greek travel agents, Manos Tours and Guinness Tours, and their advertisements.
Should I start with okay. I haven't seen them in the newspapers at all, which was a huge revelation. They were not advertised at the time, or I haven't found them. That's the right answer. They were not featuring in the big major international newspapers, but maybe in the Greek ones better. But in the internationals, they were not appearing, which is a big question, by the way. So thank you for that. Is it Alexandra? How should Alexandra answer the questions? Alexandra?
Yes. Should I?
It's time to reply as long as you.
No, I'm just waiting to see who is going to respond first. So should I start? Can you hear me? Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So about the question related to charter flights, I think that from the content of this negotiation, which was constant actually, and actually the 1968 negotiations with the government of military dictatorship was the most fruitful for the group. I think that the issue of the strategy of the group concerning charter flights was to circumvent, not to deal with it in a very straightforward manner, but to use the state in order to block the granting of permissions uncontrollably, as it was taking place in Europe, in Greece. And this is why the reaction of, we have at the time, the exchange of letters between the American embassy, for example, or the British tour operators that were saying that this violates the general agreements between the two interested parties, the countries, related to the granting of the right of charter flights for in Greece. Also, I think that the more long-term plan of dealing with this matter was the evolution of Olympic aviation, which actually they did not manage to do in the end, because of the change, from my perspective, for the change of the whole strategy of the group related to not only to Olympic Airways, but also to investments in Greece. I hope that I was short and that I responded to that question. Sorry for that. And also related to the funding, the finance, and the crews of Olympic Airways. Related to funding, as far as I know, my information are related mostly to the purchase of aircrafts and also to the payment of crews, which are actually intermediated by offshore companies of the Onassis Business Group. So we have these two companies that are not actually situated in Greece; they are situated in Panama, for example, or elsewhere, and they are handling the financial operation of Olympic Airways related to the purchase of aircrafts from Boeing, for example, and all the necessary financial steps and agreements that this demands. Related now to the nationality of the crews, I think that they were predominantly Greek, the crews, but of course, when there is another important factor that I did not mention, that I didn't have time to mention in my presentation, related to the introduction of new technology, which is constantly changing. So the expansion of Olympic Airways in the US, the transatlantic flights, also introduced new technology in the company in the form of jets. And because all this transition was not very long, it happened quite fastly, quite rapidly. I think the information says that there are some members of the crew, especially related to the pilots, the people handling the new aircrafts, that were actually exchanged or borrowed, let's say, in order to handle these first stages of this transition. But in general, I would say that they have very much invested in the training of local crews, despite of all the labor issues that emerged. I mean, all the strikes and all the class struggles that emerged from the pilots, from the mechanics, related to their salaries and so on. But in general, I would say
Alexandra
that
is clear, but we don't have more time, so we have to give the floor.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, I have three questions I think I have to answer. The first question is that these vessels delivered to the Greeks of that period were all constructed in European yards, and they were part of the initiatives and reparations from the Italians to the Greek state. There was no insurance market per se in Greece at that period, and there still is no insurance market in Greece. We follow our friends, the Brits, in that respect, and we're clients of the Brits. What I would say is that what we see here is that these vessels were delivered to Greek families based in Athens and not based in London or New York. Whereas in the other segment of Greek shipping, tramp shipping, most vessels delivered to the Greeks, I mean the Liberty vessels, were given to the non-domiciled in Athens. So we see here a focus on the internal Greek market and in families based in Athens. The second set of questions about the ports, let me be clear, and this is something that we did not suggest in our paper, that during this decade we had 16 ministers of Merchant Marine. It was a period of political instability in Greece. That means that the aim of the governments, not governments, were to support local economies and peripheral, let's say, restructural works. The port infrastructure in Igoumenitsa, in Patra, and in Kerkyra were one of the fundamental aims of these policies. And let us not forget that tourism per se wasn't initially the main aim. It became eventually the main aim. The reconstruction of these ports were one of the main aims of the ministers of Merchant Marine, all 16 ministers. And we do have in our archives a lot of non-papers, of reports about the construction work, especially in the port of Patra and in Igoumenitsa, but especially in the port of Patra. Patra was bombed by the Germans, and it needed reconstruction in its work. So Patra was the main target of these works. And the second question was there a second? Exactly. we have seen.
I think the question was about the sort of the Greekness of a trip on a Mediterranean ship of Greek interests. It's quite difficult to ascertain that through advertisements in the Greek maritime press, because mostly they would either advertise the swimming pool or the excellent restaurant on board. So it's not something that is extremely clear. But what we can say about the Egnatia Appia deal was that there was part of the agreement was that the Italian side and the Greek side would try and promote the Italian-Greek nature of the route, which is something I think we would like to explore further in the future.
Greeks should be on board employed as mariners, because one of the main aims was, of course, to find jobs for Greek mariners. So it was obligatory both for the Greek vessels and the Italian vessels in that consortium to have as employees Greek mariners on board. So the Greek flair was through the mariners on board, if we could say so. Okay, we know that for certain.
Insofar you give me the pleasure of having the closing remarks for this wonderful panel, and I mean it. A very brief comment to Jelena. She pointed out very correctly that the Greek ship owners, they did invest by and large at tourism. I'm sure she will agree with me that they did not do it primarily on their birthplaces. So this is very interesting. I mean, they came from Chios or from Andros, but Chios or Andros, they were not part of this tourism industry. They heavily invested in housing and villas, whatever, but not on this level. The second and final remark to our friends, our colleagues here, Mr. Korakas and Mr. Bisias, I love your presentation. I would rather ask for having some more focus on the political dimension, because this fairy line between Italy and Greece was actually a political venture, and there's a lot of many reports and mails and everything at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I would suggest you to have a look over the, let's say, the backstage of this political venture. And if you want me to close it with the situation today, 3 points. What is the legacy? The legacy of Olympic Airways. What are the assets of the Olympic Airways today? Aegean Airlines. What is the most valuable asset nowadays? Because it still exists. It's not widely known, but it exists. And it costs millions of euros. Slots. There are still slots worldwide belonging to the old Olympic Airways and now at the hands of the Aegean Airlines that they are not active. And this is a well kept, let's say, hidden secret. Like Athens Johannesburg, like Athens Beijing, for example. And it costs many, many, many millions. And it's not in the public debate. It's part of the, let's say, of the price Aegean is going to have whenever, and it's probably going to happen pretty soon. It will be part of a broader, a bigger airline and other operator. What about the cruise industry? Cruise industry, we had two major lines. We have Epirotiki of Potamianos, who was considered as the patriarch of the cruise lines worldwide. Potamianos, the late Potamianos, was an iconic figure in cruise lines, and he was widely accepted abroad. But then we have also Chandris, and we still have active Chandris company under the name Celebrity, which is a major part of the bigger, probably, stakeholder in the cruise industry worldwide, the Royal Caribbean Group. Thank you, and I think it's time to have lunch.